Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's listening today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. Whyagain.org. And if you go to that website, click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner. It will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one, where people have been stepped through that worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. And if you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process. And it contains a copy of the Drag-On Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so. One of the easiest ways to do that is send me an email. Email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. Or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. It's whyagain.org. And if we get a comment or a question from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. If you're listening to us on the internet at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're glad you're here. Thanks for listening and spending some time with us. And from that position, you can't type a comment or talk to us voice to voice. To do that, you would need to download the Needle app. It's N-E-D-L, Needle, an AI tuner for live radio. And if you download the app, sign in, answer a few questions, it gives you the opportunity then when we're live to type a comment or raise a hand to speak to us voice to voice. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, whether it's send us an email or type a comment or give us a call and talk directly, because it just makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, And that is just boatloads easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. And I greatly appreciate whenever I get any feedback from people, whether it's a suggestion for a different book to read or someone else to interview for the On Your Mind podcast or for this Mind Shifters radio show, or if it's just a comment or feedback about a particular discussion we had or a show. And so I just want to take the time to thank all of you who have reached out at one point or another and given feedback, whether it's a constructive criticism or an appreciation expressed through text or voicemail or whatever. So thank you for that. And we welcome those. We welcome them even when it seems like I might be in the middle of a monologue or reading from a book. Please feel free to raise a hand, type a question, send a text, etc. Yesterday was one of those times when the entire hour was spent reading from the book A Walk in the Physical with some commentary and blending in references to other books that have very, very similar messages, sometimes almost verbatim the same message. And I had at least one person who said yesterday's show was really good, and so I listened back, and I have to agree. Sometimes I get on a roll and not even aware of how much I'm saying or blending other things, and it was a very nice refresher from a lot of things to go back and listen to yesterday's show. So I will get back to reading from this book titled A Walk in the Physical, written by Christian Sundberg, and it's, one of the things that as I listened back to it, I didn't think it was very clear, but in this particular section of the book, as he talks about things, he annotates where if you want a little bit more about this or a lot more about this, you can read one of the 166 short essays that he has in another part of the book. And so I know it's happening because of automation, but there's quite a bit of work that's gone into this. And so, the last section we read yesterday was titled, It's All About Love. And it's, 2 short paragraphs. But within those 2 short paragraphs, there's 11 or 12 different citations to these short essays from the 166 short essays he's written and included in the book. So you can go a little deeper or understand what he means and why he says what he's saying. The next section in the book is titled, Why Do We Come to Earth? And Christian writes, we come to Earth to have the experience of biological creaturehood. We come to Earth for this stark experience of being something specific. Now, again, all of this stuff we're talking about is just pointing at things we can't really comprehend because, to the best of my knowledge, there's nobody who's currently in a body as a physical being who actually knows and can remember fully what it's like to have consciousness without a body. To have consciousness where it's not bound by the physical realm and by our current experience of linear time, etc. So we're alluding to and we're guessing at and we're using our words to try and approximate, but we can't know what it was like. We can just kind of hint at it. So he goes on here and he says, we come to earth so that our true, everlasting nature may expand its capacity for creativity, joy, and love. And as I talked about yesterday, uh, is this true? I don't know if it's true, but I can tell you that the more I approach my life as though this were true, the more enjoyable my life experience has gotten. So Christian goes on and says, the soul expands its, now he's calling this in quotes, an experience vocabulary. And I just thought about travel. There are many people that are born and raised and live and die within just a few miles of where they were born, and they never travel. And yet, some of the most compassionate, well-educated, productive in various ways people that I've ever met are people who love to travel. They love to travel in their own country. They love to travel outside their country. They love to travel to meet people who speak different languages and have different customs. So just as those people who love to travel are expanding their experience vocabulary, and some of these people, they drive cheap cars and they live in an inexpensive house. They spend most of their money having the experience of traveling. They tremendously prefer not buying things, but buying experiences. And that's what he's talking about here, that people come from a non-physical state into a physical realm so they can expand their experience vocabulary, their catalog of experiences and memories. Christian goes on and says, the soul adds to its potentials as it knows and works through each experience. That includes the knowing of duality, because as he talked about in his memory of his pre-physical life experience, that he had an awareness that he was connected to everyone and everything and that he was not separate. And so when you're in a non-physical realm where there isn't a physical body to help you understand where you begin and end and somebody else begins, there is no duality in that sense. So people come into the physical realm so they can experience, I'm over here and you're over there. There was a past, there's a present, there's a future in a linear way. Christian goes on and says, the capacity of the soul to know, to be, and to understand some quality or aspect of what we call duality, that capacity expands as that quality or aspect arises in a context, and also as that quality's or that aspect's opposite is experienced. The soul uses the experience of contrast as a creative tool. The temporary dark is worth experiencing, knowing to expand. It's worth experiencing as a way of knowing it so that you can expand the everlasting light. There's a little children's book. It's not really so much a little children's book, but it's called The Little Soul in the Sun. And the idea in the book is that as a being of light, brilliance and light and feeling connected to everything, the little soul wondered what it might be like to feel less than all and everything, and got curious and couldn't understand what it would be like to be less than. And so the Son or the Creator or God or whatever you want to call it decided to arrange so that the little soul could have an experience of being in the darkness, being surrounded by darkness. And other entities, other consciousness had to agree to pretend that the little soul wasn't just full of light and love and all there is. So it's the contrast that was necessary, or that some would say is necessary, for us to expand our experience vocabulary or our experience card catalog, and that it is worth the experience of being in darkness or experiencing pain or fear or sadness. Because in the end, we go back to our connection to everything and the bliss state and this deep felt knowing sense that it's all okay. And yet, in the process of that experience of the darkness or being less than, it doesn't feel so okay. So Christian goes on here and says, the soul also expands through choice making. The soul seeks to express its true love and joyful nature within a potentially challenging context. And then the soul expands as it chooses how it is going to meet each experience of limitation. And the soul issues intent because it makes choices within that context. Loving intent, which is reflective of the native unity of being, loving intent supports personal and collective expansion. And loving intent is additive. Fearful intent is reflective of the illusion of separation. Fearful intent ends up being reductive, or it adds further layers of challenge. And you can think of challenge as potential for growth, both for oneself and for others. Again, when they're talking about challenge and potential for growth, my mind goes to the idea of I go into a gymnasium and I start lifting weights that are comfortable for me to lift until my arms get tired, and then I pick a weight that's even heavier and start lifting it until my arms are more than just tired, they're starting to ache, and then I put that down and I might pick up another weight that's almost impossible for me to lift and lift it just a few times. And now I'm feeling that, they call it the burn in the muscles. And in that way, in that challenging my muscles to do more, I set up the circumstances by which, if all other things are equal, there's proper nutrition and the nerves are firing well, etc., the muscles will expand and grow and heal even stronger than they were before the exercise. Christian goes on and says, we also come for the purposes of serving one another. We are serving each other whether we realize it or not, and we are helping others fulfill their own individual or collective goals. He says physical incarnation allows us to intentionally put ourselves in a place where we are, quote, forced, close quotes, to deal with things that we otherwise may not have stayed to experience. In order to have the experience of creaturehood here on earth, we must accept the veil. We must forget our infinite, all-connected, all-loving nature. The veil, he says, is a set of constraints in consciousness and in space. It's a thing that we temporarily agree to let it obscure our true nature. And it rigorously obscures our true nature so that we can have the full experience of being human. The veil causes us to, quote, forget, close quotes, what we are, and it generally limits our perception to the physical so that we can actually be the human character. It's almost like playing a role in a play. Working here to turn on the microphone for Susan Bingham.
Hi, Dr. Tim.
Hello.
Hi. Yesterday's show was really good, and I had a question from that, and it feeds right into what you're reading right now. I remember years ago I had a talk with Ken Wapnick, who was the one that got the Course in Miracles published. And I've mentioned this before. I asked him, what is the biggest challenge for you in doing this work and just being a human being on the planet? And he said, fatigue. And I'm thinking so much of what you're talking about has to do with a certain level of vitality, which we need to have in order to welcome and benefit from the experiences that we're being offered. And then you talked, this is all feeding into the same thing, you talked about accepting certain limitations as we get older, the fact that you can't run around, or you're not as strong, or you can't do cartwheels, or whatever. Accepting that, which brings to mind the word surrender, surrendering to being less. And yet, I would hope that we're still able to be open to benefiting and growing from the experiences that are coming our way. And sometimes I think that there comes a point, well, I had a shingle shot yesterday, and I've been totally wiped out from it, just the reaction from it. And it's going away, but I was thinking, here I am, this person who can hardly get up off the bed and walk around, don't feel like eating or anything, the loss of vitality. And I'm wondering, can I still learn? I don't even know if I'm going to welcome the experience. I don't know if I want to have a lot of experience. Not like this. If I had to live like this for the rest of my life, I wouldn't want to take a pill and off myself, because there isn't enough vitality in there to want to grow from my experiences. I don't know how to put this together into a question, but I'd love to have you talk about that.
Well, I can. There's a whole series of things that flooded into my mind when we were talking, and one of them is the first thing that came up was that the way you talked about it, that I would be judging myself as less than because I can't do cartwheels now.
Yeah.
Or I can't run the way I did. And I would just highlight that that's just a judgment.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's no truth in it except what I want to believe is true about it. And so if I say it's horrible that I can't, ambulate the way I used to and get around and, run 5 or 10 miles after work, after working all day on construction, or lift 50-pound blocks over my head, one in each hand for hours on end. If I say it's horrible that I can't do that, it's just a thought pattern.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any more validity or less validity than anything else that I make up in my head. So that's the one thing is that came to mind right away, to kind of get clear about the fact that that's just a judgment. I can observe that there's a difference,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything less than what it was before. It's just different then. I can discern the difference,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing because I remember we have this thing that runs in my family with the neuropathy that weakens the hands and the feet, and it they call it familial peripheral neuropathy because that's just 3 words to describe it. It runs in the family. It
Yeah.
starts on the periphery, like
Mm-hmm.
in the fingertips and the toes, and
Right.
it's a process of the nerves. They quit firing, and so any muscles that depend on those nerves to fire start to atrophy over time.
Good grief.
So I started laughing because there was a time not too long ago, my brother was, he called and said, what's going on? I said, well, I I made the mistake of deciding to run around the block at just the same time when an ambulance was passing, and it took me 20 minutes to convince them I wasn't having a seizure.
Wow.
Right? So I can joke about it, but I have
Mm-hmm.
to understand that I can't run. I can't
Mm-hmm.
lift the things I used to lift. I can't, it isn't really reasonable for me to try and pretend that I don't need reminders to think about every step because if I try to pretend, there will be consequences. I've experienced some of those consequences. They result in
Right.
falls and injuries and things like that.
Yeah.
So that was one point. The other point you're talking about, I think, is absolutely true, which is one of the big reasons I talk so much to people about please be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
Please understand that when you're going through high stress times or you're doing all that you do for your children and your work and your energy level is low, that you give yourself permission to to rest, to take a nap, to
Mm.
hydrate, to eat some good food,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to cancel some of the mind energy you would normally pour into the judgments,
Mm-hmm.
right? The judgment of,
Yeah.
did I have a productive day? Well, my productive
Mm-hmm.
day was was one where I got up at 5 in the morning and was at the construction site by 6:30 and worked for 9 or 10 hours straight and then came home and lifted some weights and then went for a run.
Mm.
It, well, those days aren't here anymore, right? Is that a
Yeah.
bad thing? No, it's just a thing.
Okay, you're helping me sort of zero in on my question. As you know, I've been reading the Practice of the Presence of God, and Brother Lawrence maintains contact with God a lot. He had to work at it at first, which is heartening because I certainly have to. But it takes, to my mind, it takes a kind of vitality to maintain that focus and to keep pointing the mind and the heart in that direction. And that goes too. I had a teacher once, a religious teacher. He was in the Hindu tradition. He was a Swami, and he was our first serious spiritual teacher. And he said, get all your devotions in when you're young and do all your spiritual disciplines, because after age 50, you just don't have the kind of vitality that you had before, and you have to just ride on what you did earlier because you can't do that anymore. You're talking about all that, but if you lose your capacity to be loving, focused, practicing the presence of God, if that capacity goes too, then that seems just devastating. So,
Well, okay, but it's only devastating if you judge it as devastating. And
yeah.
this book, this whole idea that Christian Sundberg is talking about in the book A Walk in the Physical, is that having that experience in the physical realm where your energetic vitality decreases and facing the challenge of how difficult it is to stay loving when you're tired, when you're, quote, crabby, close quotes.
Yeah, right.
That is the purpose of being here.
Okay.
To be,
Even that.
yes, to be willing to recognize that, oh, I'm struggling to be loving right now. And it's going to take an extra. I had somebody in my office yesterday or the day before, and they were talking about the difference between biting their tongue and eating crow, and they didn't know there was a difference. They were using the two. They were using the two interchangeably. And so he asked me to explain to him what I thought the difference was. Biting my tongue means that I keep myself from speaking something out loud that I've thought, that I have this clear thought to express something, and when I bite my tongue, I don't say it out loud. I might be thinking it, but I don't say it out loud. Eating crow means I went ahead and said it out loud, and later I have to acknowledge I was wrong. So I apologize. I say, okay, my mistake. I was off base here, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so when I'm in the kind of situation that you're referring to, and I'm awake and aware to the fact that I'm having a really hard time staying loving here, it might mean that I bite my tongue quite often, that I don't say what my angry, irritable part of myself would want to say here.
Right.
And yet, the experience of wanting to yell at somebody or blame somebody else for my upset, and then choosing to be kind anyway, or even recognizing as the angry words are leaving my mouth, gee, I wish I wasn't doing this.
Yeah.
That's all part of the experience that helps me grow.
Yeah.
That helps me get stronger at choosing for love over fear, over resentment, over hurt, over guilt and shame, etc. So the other thing that comes to mind when you ask a question like this is how many people at different religions, and I think you might be one of them, I'm not for sure, but have been taught that they're going to be judged. And so a lot of this stress about, wait a minute, it's so hard for me to be loving when I'm this tired, or when my body aches, or when I'm not, my body's not functioning well, and I can't be as loving as I wanted to be, and doggone it, then I'm going to get a bad grade. Or, on the final judgment day, et cetera, et cetera. This horrible thing is going to befall me, and that's not fair. It's not my fault. I tried to be nice, but I didn't have the energy, or whatever. Now, I don't know if any of that plays into what you're experiencing, but that's just what came to mind to share, is that most of the spiritual traditions, the deep spiritual traditions that I've resonated with, they have a very different view about that. And there's not going to be some deity on a throne judging me on the last day.
Yeah, you make me realize I need to do a wake-up sheet on Brother Lawrence, because I'm jealous of him, because he spent so much time feeling in a state of bliss that he didn't feel he deserved, because he kept breaking things, as he said. He was a big guy and clumsy. And he took...
Yeah, he was so full of judgment. That was one of the things that made that book so difficult for me, is he spent so much time judging himself negatively.
And thinking that God should punish him for that. And yet he was surprised that God didn't punish him, that God rewarded him with bliss and joy. And I'm thinking, I know, I mean, one of the boys came up to my study because I was just lying down, not functioning, and he came up and said, "Are you okay?" And I could be kind and loving toward him because it's easy, because he's a delightful person. But I was thinking, I have nothing to give him. I'm not even standing up. A lot of judgment. You're right. That's what it is. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there were so many twists and distortions in that book by Brother Lawrence, and you're bringing one of them into clarity for
Mm-hmm.
me now. It's been so long since I've read it, but as you say that, I remember. Yeah, he was so negative and down on himself, and that was something I couldn't really resonate with. It didn't really, and I saw where he was trying to go with it, right? He was trying to make a turn for the better. Oh, but here's this benevolent God that's blessing me with bliss. But my understanding of different spiritual teachings and tools was that it wasn't God that was blessing him with bliss. It was that he was choosing for bliss. He was choosing to focus on things other than
Mm-hmm.
what came up and hit him first would be, oh, I'm so clumsy and oh, I'm not worthy. But instead of staying with that, he released it
Mm-hmm.
and looked at other aspects of his life that are a blessing. And that's what we're being
And,
invited to do with all of these books that we read
yeah.
on the
Well, he
Mind
really
Shifters
does
radio show.
that. I think you've got a distorted or overblown view of how much he was down on himself. I think that is part of it, but he left that behind fairly soon. I would I would
By his
really
report. I will read this book again and we can have another discussion. I know, I know.
all
And
right.
but just also understand he's just a person.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that in this situation you might be back to your pedestalizing, right? Putting him up on a pedestal.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's true.
Yeah, I think
To,
you might want to take a look at that and do some worksheets on how you put people on a pedestal. And I
oh,
want you to understand that that's never been a good thing for you or the people you do it with.
mhm. Yeah, that's true. So, on another note, I don't know if you've heard of this Dr. Russell Razak. I don't know how you pronounce his name. Razzaque. He's on YouTube. He is a psychiatrist who does analyses or makes comments on what's happening in our government with the figures who are at the head of everything and why they are doing what they're doing. And I know this is getting into political stuff, and you may not want to, but I was having this fantasy about how great it would be if you would interview him. I think he's an Englishman. You could watch it. He's a different nationality, but I think he lives and speaks out of England. And I don't know whether he is accessible, but he's concerned that whatever he is saying may not be available on regular YouTube anymore. He's suggesting that we subscribe to some newsletter because a lot of the media outlets are being manipulated or shut down right now. And he is an amazing he has an amazing take on what's going on right now in the country. And that might be just something you didn't want to go there, but
Well, I'll take a look at it.
yeah.
I'll listen. Don't really have any idea right now what you're referring to or what his take is, but
Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Well,
Russell
he talks
and
about trauma of Elon Musk, the trauma that Donald Trump went through, trauma of J.D. Vance, what their childhoods were like. He's got a very psychological take on it, and it's to my mind, it's very forgiving and loving, even though he's saying we're in trouble here because this is the kind of mindset that somehow found its way to the top and is doing things that probably aren't so good for the country. That's where it gets into political, and I know people are on different sides. And anyway, Russell Razak.
All right, I'll make a note.
Okay.
I will make a note.
Yeah, a lot of the, this change that is coming about in my family, and Tim Bingham and I are talking about how we're going to live in the future, or if we are going to join our kids in a different part of the country, talk about a new experience. I'm all for it. I love it here. I could happily stay here. But there's an awful lot of the fear of not having the vitality to not impose on my kids. That we will use them if they're nearby. They will take it upon themselves, even if we don't. So anyway, the wheels are turning.
Well, just remember, the core of this work then would be to do the worksheets or the tapping or the journaling.
Right. Mm-hmm.
To dismantle whatever fear you generate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it, I realized. And I've been bragging about how the tools have kept me from feeling anxiety, and they have. The kind of anxiety I had when I first started listening to the radio show, I think now were panic attacks. And they were often inchoate. I didn't know where they came from, or I would glom onto climate change or something, which is scary enough. But the anxiety I'm feeling now is a very different quality. It's workable with. It's dismemberable or disintegratable. Whereas before it was as if I was just stuck. So.
Well, think about it in terms of how you just said that, climate change is scary enough. The core of this work would have you catch that phrase and say, oh, what I really mean by that is I can generate a lot of fear when I think about climate change. Because climate change on its own isn't scary. It's just one thing that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Just like the sun is coming up. No, it's not. We're turning toward the sun, and
Mm-hmm.
then the sun's going down. No, the sun's not going anywhere, but we're turning away from it.
Yeah.
In our position on this flat rock or globe, depending upon what you want to believe in, right? Because there are people that are going to actively choose to believe in a flat Earth.
Yeah.
Now, their choice to believe in that, as you might imagine, doesn't actually change the truth of it. And we had a comment. I apologize for the delay, but these are from 18 minutes ago, 13 minutes ago, and 7 minutes ago from, I think it's Don. And he says, the lesson would be to recognize not to get the shingles vaccine, but don't necessarily trust me, ask Michael. And then 13 minutes ago, he said, the vitality issue is a belief system. And for some people, that's true. It's a belief system and nothing else. And then he said 8 minutes ago, in terms of losing vitality as we age. And Michael Ryce likes to quote something from the DeCourcy Clinic where they say, time on its own has no effect on tissue.
Yeah.
But it's the belief in the negative effects of time that some people hold on to that does this work, this disintegration, etc. Now, that's something that Michael quotes. Does that mean it's the truth? I have no idea. All right, capital T truth? I don't know.
I know I have to take a wake-up sheet every time he says that.
Yeah, and some people don't want to hear that, and they don't want to hear, well, my fatigue isn't real. It's just a belief system. Okay, but other people hear that and go, wait a minute, is that true? Let me experiment with that. And they get some wonderful results. If you get wonderful results from pretending or believing that your fatigue is just a belief system and you're going to believe something else and all of a sudden you've got more energy, great.
Yeah.
At the same time, please accept this invitation, or at least consider this invitation. If hearing something like that from Don or anybody else is something your mind uses to generate upset, then
Yeah.
please accept the invitation to use a reality management worksheet or
Mhm.
the EFT tapping or Michael Ryce's targeted journaling that he calls the mind shifter tool to dismantle the upset that you're generating. Because the fact that somebody makes a statement, whatever that statement is, does not create upset in you. You
Yeah.
can choose upset,
Yep.
right? You can generate upset,
Mhm.
and you can do it soon and often if you so desire. And yet, it's not being caused by anyone or anything outside of you.
Why do we have to hear that so many times?
Well, because we've heard the opposite for decades. We've been trained and conditioned into, you made me angry, you hurt my feelings, you're offending me, that's scary. You just said it. You said it again. Oh,
Mm.
this climate change is scary enough all by itself.
Mm.
We've been programmed to believe that people and things outside of us create and maintain our emotional states. And we've been conditioned, you might say, brainwashed, um, indoctrinated into that belief system for decades. Most of us
Yeah.
for quite a few decades
Mhm.
before anybody even suggests anything different.
Right.
So that's reason enough why it needs to be repeated so often. So thank you, Don, for the comments and adding to the discussion. So the idea is like a core fundamental thing that Michael and Jeannie are offering with the reality management worksheet and with all of these hours of um, the audio files on from the internet show for 14 plus years is this recognition that you don't have to believe any of this. You can try this out for yourself. But the recognition that every emotion I experience is the result of a creation, an internal creation within the confines of my energy system.
Yeah.
And if I can just remind myself of that enough times and begin to work with the tools that they offer absolutely
Mm.
free, I can
Mhm.
start demonstrating to myself the actuality of it. And then I don't have to believe anything. I don't have to follow anybody. I don't need to argue with anyone about anything. You know, I love this idea. I found this. I'm going to see if I can find this. There's a quote. I forget who it's from actually, but it's the idea of how and why we argue with people. I might have read this already on the internet show in the past, but um, it's so important to understand that. Okay, so here's the quote. If there's an opinion contrary to your own, and you decide to get angry about it, that's a sign that you are subconsciously aware that there's no real good reason for you thinking as you do,
Yeah.
right? If someone maintains that 2 and 2 are 5, or that Iceland is on the equator, it would be more accurate to feel pity for them rather than
Mhm.
anger,
All right.
unless you know so little about arithmetic or geography that the opinion this person has shared shakes your own conviction in what you
Mhm.
thought you knew.
That's going on right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He writes here that this is from Bertrand Russell. He writes that the most savage controversies are those about matters as to which there is no good evidence either way.
Mm.
Persecution is used in theology,
Mm.
not in arithmetic, because in arithmetic there is knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
In theology, there's only opinion. So whenever you find yourself getting angry about a difference of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
be on guard.
Right.
You will probably find, if you choose to examine it, that your belief is going beyond what the evidence warrants.
That's so true.
And I've heard this, it may have come from him first, but I've heard this from a variety of different perspectives when people are trying to talk about conflict resolution and negotiation, and it's a wisdom that says, hey, wait a minute, if somebody, it's like I've talked about the aardvark example, right? Because I try to tell people I'll never be upset about anything anybody ever says or doesn't do that I think they should, unless I'm still judging myself negatively for the same or similar thing. So if
Mm.
somebody comes up to me and says, oh my God, Hayes, what are you doing? Nobody believes this. You're walking around in that human suit, and we all know you're an aardvark. If somebody comes up to me and says that to me, it doesn't result in me generating anger.
Mm-hmm.
I either find it humorous or I open my heart for compassion to that person. Why? Because there's never been a part of me that secretly feared that I might be a four-legged, long-haired creature with a long nose and a long tail that eats ants.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had that fear, and I was in one way or another doing my best to appear to everybody as though I'm human, and somebody comes along and points that out, it's resonating a deep fear I already have in me, I'll generate stronger experience of that fear.
Mm.
So a lot of people say, well, that's a ridiculous example. So I bring it closer to home and I say, listen, if 30 years ago somebody told me I was a lousy therapist, it would stab in my heart. I would generate such upset over this.
Mm-hmm.
I would be redoubling my efforts to demonstrate to them that they're wrong because I did have insecurities in my
Mm-hmm.
first 20 or 30 years of doing therapy. Probably at about the 30 or 40 year mark, I decided to give that up.
Mm.
And let people have their opinions without putting myself on the emotional roller coaster about what their opinion might mean in terms of truth. And yet I spent plenty of time in the first, 20 or 30 years of doing therapy wondering if I was good enough, working hard, trying to be good enough. And during those periods of time, even if people weren't intending to tell me I was bad or wrong as a therapist, if I had a hint of it that I could
Mm.
create from their
Mm-hmm.
exchange with me,
Yeah.
I would go on that roller coaster 20 times. Give me
Mm.
another ticket. I'm getting back on. I'll stand in line to ride that roller coaster again and
Right.
ride it again.
Well, that reminds me of your email from your colleague who questioned something about your interview. You got to give that up too, Dr. Tim. You're a good
Right,
interviewer.
right. But it's just that idea of at every level,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not done with my work until it simply doesn't come up again,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
I can't benefit from having the thought, oh, I'm done with this, and then pretending that's true, because all that's going to do most likely is blind me to the next good set of energies within me that indicate there's some more work for me to do.
Yeah.
And when I'm blind to that and those energies get resonated, what do? I go looking for people and things outside of me to blame. And now
Yeah.
I feel even more justified because I've done so much work over the years. Everybody knows what a good worker I am and how I do
Mm.
my own work. So this upset must be about that other person.
Right.
And that, I think, is just a natural consequence of buying into the false belief that I'm done with something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, in our support group, and I know there's not much time, but we were talking about how to practice the presence when, for me, it's still an intellectual effort. It isn't natural, and it isn't from the heart really yet, and I'm hoping it'll get so. But Ellen, you remember she was on when we did the Course in Miracles. Ellen read something out of the Course of Love, which said how to bring yourself into the present is be with your feelings. Just be with how you feel, and you are in the present. And then that can morph into being aware of the presence with a capital P. I mean, at least it's a way of finding your way into the moment and what's actually happening. I know that's not, you weren't talking about that right then, but I
Right,
wanted to say
but
that.
it is really a good point,
Yeah.
right? Because life is flowing, the truth of life is here, we're living it. We may not be experiencing it, but we're living it, right? Because what do I mean by that? I can distract myself. I can pretend that I'm separate from everyone and everything. I can create this kind of a prison for myself that Einstein talked about. So I may not be experiencing myself as the presence of love connected to everything, but that doesn't change the fact that that's always true. So the
Yeah.
more I can move into just allowing and accepting whatever is,
Mm.
including if I'm feeling rage, including if I'm feeling deep grief, including if I'm feeling joyful bliss, just be with it. That's a
Mm.
better pathway to the realization of what is. And as Michael Singer would talk about in that arena, he would say, can you learn to just be okay, even if there's this tremendous intense energy that we call an emotion moving
Yeah.
through your heart space?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can learn to be okay with it rather than fight against it or tighten and contract against it or try to change it, then I don't add these boulders or samskaras or these obstructions to the full open experience of life, which in Michael Singer's work and Michael Ryce's work, it's what we're intended to experience, the fullness of life and our true nature as love in every cell of our body all the time. They use slightly different words for it, but to my eye and ear, Michael Singer and Michael Ryce are talking about the same thing.
Mm.
So I realize we're at the end of our hour. Thank you so much for the call, as always. And
Thanks too.
this is a Thursday, so there will be a support group tonight. Mindshiftersacademy.org is the website you go to find that information for joining us free from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central. And I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.